Hello and welcome to this beginner's React tutorial. So what is React? React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. You build these interfaces with components, small pieces of code. For example, you could have a custom button component or something more complex. You're going to want to know some JavaScript, and HTML would help. We'll also be using some features from ES6, which is a newer version of JavaScript. Let's get into the code and create our first project. You'll need to have Node installed on your computer, so if you don't, head over to nodejs.org and get that installed. In Visual Studio, I'll open up a terminal and run npx create react app. npx is a package runner tool that comes with npm. Then we put the name of our app. We'll start with example app. You can't have capital letters for the project name, so we'll try example-app. And we'll wait for that to finish loading. Okay, our app is finished being created, so let's go over the project structure. You've got your node modules folder, which you'll never really touch. That's where package information is stored. In the public folder, we've got the index.html. Inside of that, we have the basic HTML setup for a web page. You'll add your metadata and links here. We also have this div with an ID of root. That's where our app is being rendered, and we'll come back to that in a second. We also have these basic React logos for things like the browser tab icon. Now inside the source folder, we have the app.css, which we'll come back to later to style the app. The app.js file, which is really the only component being rendered if we were to start the app. App.test.js, you don't really need to worry about. Then we have our index.css and index.js. Inside the index.js file, we have this React DOM.render function call. In the parentheses, we have a React strict mode component. Then inside that, we have the app component. And it's rendering our app to the document with an ID of root, which is the div I mentioned earlier. That's all we'll cover in the source folder, as later we'll delete most of the other files. So we mentioned components earlier. Let's dive into those. Components let you split code into reusable pieces. They accept dynamic props or properties and return React elements. Let's get back to Visual Studio and create a component. First, we'll clean up the source folder by deleting app.test.js, logo.svg, report web vitals, and setuptests.js. Now inside of the index.js file, get rid of the report web vitals call and its import, then the React strict mode component surrounding our app, and save the file. Now let's create that component. In the source folder, create a components folder. Here, I'll create a hello.js file. Now to use React, we need to import it from React. There are functional components made with a JavaScript function, and there are class-based components. Let's create a functional component first. I'll create a hello function, and we went over how they take in props. Well, to do that with functional components, we pass props in as a parameter. Now in the function body, we'll return what we want to display. I'll add a h2, then pass in hello. Now I'm going to introduce JSX, which we'll cover in more detail in a second. Open up some curly braces and pass in props.name. And that's all we need to create a basic component. So I'll export it at the bottom. Now to create a class-based component. I'll comment out the functional component. Now we'll create a hello class that extends component from React, but we need to import that. After React, add a comma and open up some braces where we'll destructure component from React. We need to wrap it in braces since component isn't the default export of React. Before we go on, it's important to know that React treats components starting with lowercase letters as regular HTML tags. Our React components need to start with an uppercase letter. After component, open up some braces, call the render function, then open some braces. Inside the body, we can return what we want to display, so I'll add a header to, then pass in hello. Above the render method is where we define functions to be used in the component. We'll create some later on. Okay, so what is JSX? JSX is a syntax extension of JavaScript. It produces React elements. So this hello constant would represent an element we can display in the browser. You can embed expressions in JSX. With JSX, you can put any JavaScript expression inside the curly braces. Back in Visual Studio, I want to embed a name prop in our H2. With class-based components, we clearly don't pass props in as an argument. Another thing that's different, we have to access the this keyword first. So embed a name prop, it would be this.props.name. The this keyword deals with scope, since this is a class we're creating. We'll access this when dealing with props, state, and functions within the component, so you'll see more of this. Another thing you can do with JSX is use it for an element attribute. Create another class-based component named welcome. We have the basic component set up. Return a paragraph. We'll give it a class name attribute. Notice how it's class name, not class, which is a reserved word in JavaScript. And another thing is it's in camel case. That's the naming convention for element attributes. Now set the class name to some braces, and we'll pass in classes.header. We'll go into styling more later, but that's using JSX for an attribute. It can be extremely helpful when returning conditional attributes. Okay, so we talked about props or properties a lot so far. Let's go over those. Props allow you to pass dynamic information to your components. You pass props down as attributes to your component, then can change the content based on what's there. Let's display our component on the screen, making use of the props.name. Inside of the app.js file, remove the logo import and this image element that's referencing the logo we deleted. Now to start up the app and see what it looks like. I'll open up a terminal, change directories to the example app, and run npm start to start our app. If there's no bugs, the app should open in your browser. This is quite plain, especially since we removed the React logo. Let's get our component on the screen. Inside the hello.js file, make sure you don't have the hello component commented out like I do right now. Then in the app.js, we'll import it. So import hello from components/hello.js. And under the header element, we'll add our hello component with a self-closing tag. So this component will render, but in the component, we're accessing a name property, so we should pass name as an attribute. I'll just set it to John, because why not? John Doe is pretty popular. I'm using quotes to pass the attribute, but remember, we could pass something with JSX. And if we go back to the browser, we see our component displays Hello John. Another thing you should know about components is they must never modify their own props. State, on the other hand, lets you change a component's output over time or in response to a specific action. We'll get into state management a little later. Okay, so how do we style these components? Well, let's give some style to our hello component. One way to style a component is with inline styles. Give the h2 a style attribute, then open up two sets of braces. The first set of braces is to declare we're using JSX. The second set of braces is an object literal, where we will create some inline styles. For inline styles, all properties are written in camel case. Give it a font size of 5 rem and a color of orange. I'll open it up in the browser, and you see our orange component. The next way to style our app would be to add global styles through the app.css file. So right here, I'll give every h2 in the app a text decoration of underline, then show it in the browser. I'll get rid of that change and remove the inline styles from the hello component. Now to show you the next method of styling a component. You see we can create global styles, but you can also create a CSS file that will apply to one specific component. In the components folder, I'll create a hello.module.css file. We're able to do this with newer versions of React. In here, I'll create a header class and set the color to rosy brown. Back in the hello.js file, give the h2 a class name attribute, then set it to some JSX containing classes.header. Classes is an object we need to import. So import classes from hello.module.css. I'll save, then open the app. You can see our hello message is now rosy brown, and we can only access those classes where we import them. That's it for this part. Thanks for watching.